So the other thing, of course, Stargate SG-1, going back to the slide again, both of these shows were just chock full of disclosure. Now, one of the things that he talked about with Babylon 5 that was the most fascinating to me was something that he called the Psi-Core. Now, we were never entirely clear as to whether he knew that they were called the Psi-Core or whether he made that term up. It does appear that that's what it was called, but this is another one of these really, really incredible stories because, you know, the Psi-Core, so he claimed that first of all, when he was at the base, they came up to him at one point and they started talking about, you know, white supremacy, Nazi ideology, and he wasn't into it. And if he had been, he found out later, if he had been, oh yeah, that sounds great, you know, they would have recruited him into a program that taught those kind of racist, horrible things. Another time that they came up to him, and a similar kind of thing, they started talking to him about ESP. Have you had psychic experiences? Have you ever, you know, thought about somebody and then they called you on the phone right afterwards or something like that? And you, yeah, I've had all that kind of stuff. And they said, well, here's the thing. Take this card, come to this room, 9 o'clock, Wednesday night. We're going to pay for it. You're going to get a training, if you want to have it, training in how to be more psychic. We're going to bring you in. We're going to teach you these really, really cool things because ultimately, what do they need? They needed people to operate the chair, and they have to train you to be psychic so that you can use the chair, okay? So the first thing that happened was that he had this interview where he sat down with this man, and the man is having a seemingly ordinary conversation with him. And it's going to take a little explanation to get to this, but the man, at the same time that there's an ordinary conversation, the man is a very trained psychic, and he is psychically attacking Bruce in his mind. Now, if you don't actually, so the interview appears to be normal, all the real stuff is going on in the psychic plane. The only way you pass and they let you into the program is if in the middle of this, you start touching your head. What are you doing? What are you doing? You know, you start yelling and really freaking out. Like, you're doing something to my head. Stop. What are you doing? Stop. Okay, if that's what happens, congratulations, you passed. Because this guy is psychically attacking you. He's actually hurting you. And apparently when you get the training that they provide, this is what happens. So they can attack other people. And he said that depending upon what your specialty is, whether you're a telepath or a telekinetic, and again, only 1 out of 1,000 people they discovered were telekinetics, okay? But if you're a telekinetic, then they really like you because now you can pinch the carotid artery in somebody's neck, restrict blood flow, and cause them to stroke out and die. So these are psychic assassins. If you're a telepath, they want to get you to do remote influencing, where if you are a successful graduate, that you could remote influence somebody to hurt themselves or kill themselves. It's very sad, and I'm sorry to even have to tell you this stuff, but this is what he told me, okay? I'm giving you the disclosure. So, they always have pro words. They don't want you to know what's really going on. So the pro words were teeps and teeks. So if you hear somebody talking and they say teeps and teeks, you don't know what the heck they're talking about. A teep is a telepath, and a teek is a telekinetic for TP, telepathy, and TK, telekinetic. Now what they would do is they would actually rank you in terms of how psychic you are on a scale that starts with a P0 through a P10. Now, the P scale actually is something that you can develop. So they had these special exercises that they trained people in to help them develop their psychic ability. The main exercise that you had to do the most often was lots and lots of meditation. And they also had a practice that you were supposed to do in meditation called clustering. Now think about the fact that people started to be able to move books and slam them against the wall with their minds when they learned this, if they were one of those 1 in 1,000 teeks, the telekinetic type. So otherwise, if you're a teep and you're one of those other 999, you're never going to be able to do telekinesis, unfortunately, because that would be fun. I mean, I would use it benevolently, but yeah, it would be really cool to be able to do that. So anyway, clustering means that when you're meditating, that you think about certain things and then you you find the things that you have an emotional charge for. So they might actually do this in an exercise with you where they sit down, and then they say, okay, how do you feel about a spoon? Well, Danny and Brinkley probably doesn't want me to tell people this, but he watched somebody get killed with a spoon, so he doesn't like spoons at all. You can't even, and I forgot this a couple times when we were having dinner with him. He doesn't want to have a spoon around. Sorry, Danny, sorry, Uncle Mama. But, so like, let's say you have an emotional charge around a spoon. Then they say, okay, if you have an emotional charge around the spoon, what else does it make you think of? Well, the spoon makes me think of da-da-da-da. Well, what else does that make you think of? Well, that makes me think of da-da-da-da. So they would do this thing called clustering, where you have to analyze everything in your life that has an emotional charge, and then find out what it's associated with, and then what's that associated with, and what's that associated with. And what they found was that everything clusters down to birth trauma and parent trauma. Everything basically comes back to that you as a child think that your parents are God, and God has abandoned you when they start saying no and you can't have that spoon anymore. They don't want to let you feed yourself. They take the spoon away. So ultimately the spoon is this emotional charge because they wouldn't feed you and they said no, and you start crying, and eventually you'll remember that. The other thing he said was that the dark night of the soul is incredibly important for the psychic training program. And that's what we're going through now as a collective. We're all going through it individually because of the economy and the violence and all this scary stuff. We're also going through it collectively. The whole planet is going through a weird dark night of the soul. Now, this is what he said. It was very interesting and very strange. I talked about the reciprocity between space and time. Let me go wide again. Talked about the reciprocity between space and time. So when you are having a dark night of the soul, they said that it is an implosion of your external reality. In other words, the normal stuff that you take for granted in your external reality is imploding. It's coming in on you. You feel compressed. You start to crouch. You start to feel bad inside, okay? But then, as there is an implosion of your external reality, there is an explosion of your internal reality. Just like the physics is called reciprocal system, it's the reciprocal between space and time. There's a reciprocal between your outer world, your ego, your personality self, what you project to others, and then your inner world, who you really are, your spirit, your soul, your dreams, and that's where all this power comes from. So if you implode your external reality, you explode your internal reality. And this is where it gets really, really strange, because as your internal reality explodes, the actual size of your dream landscape gets bigger. This is a whole other amazing topic I've talked about before, so I won't repeat too much on this, but one of the other exercises that made people be able to do these amazing feats of consciousness is they would have you remember your dreams and then draw the landscape of what was in the dream. So you have to draw the layout of what you saw and where the objects are. And then what they teach you is that these objects represent parts of yourself. Everything in the dream is yourself. Every character is yourself. Every object is yourself. The landscape is you. And it's all symbolic. So when you meet this character, that symbolizes some part of yourself. If that character is somebody you knew when you were a kid, then it means that that's from that part of your life. So I used to have all these horrible nightmares where I had to go back to high school, which was hell for me, because I was very heavily bullied, as you can probably imagine. You know, having a 180 IQ and getting A's on everything as a kid, people hated me. And then because I was overweight for several years, they really used that as their weapon. By the way, I've been jogging and I continue to lose weight. I'm doing great. So you can actually probably see it with my jaw, right? I'm getting better. So that's because I'm not sitting around doing this research all day. I'm actually starting to live my life for the first time, which is part of why I haven't been doing as much stuff. But I'm going to be back a lot more often now, as long as I don't lose my channel. I want to do more of these, and I don't want to go months at a time, or even, hopefully I won't go more than a few weeks at a time before I do something else. So anyway, but I wanted to come back with a bang. I mean, are you guys loving this or what? This is like some really great stuff, and I'm very happy to be doing this for you. Trying to keep it within a reasonable time limit, and we're doing okay. So, what they teach you is that the dream landscape is a representational landscape of the psyche. It represents your psyche. Everything in there has meaning for you. I talk about this extensively in the new book, Awakening the Dream, how all this works. I didn't really get into the Bruce stuff very much. I don't know if I covered it at all, actually, but I've done it in many other lectures. So anyway, another really weird thing that they talk about is some esoteric principle that they apparently had in secret mystery school teachings that they kept secret. And it's the arrow of time points in the direction you're facing. And this is also the secret of time travel. Time appears to be moving forward based on the direction that you are moving in. So your dream landscape might just be this little box, and you got little objects in the box that you draw, and when you go to these dreams, the objects won't be the same, but they'll be in the same location. That's what's so weird. The landscape stays the same, the objects have the same symbolic meaning, and as you have more of these dreams, the objects will show you different versions of the same symbols. And then in the dream, you travel through the landscape, and the arrow of time travels in the direction that you're facing. So as you walk through the landscape, you eventually come back to the beginning. That's a cycle, right? That's a cycle that you go through. But it appears now that you've gone back to the beginning that because you're facing this way, the arrow of time is still pointing ahead. So it's still the future. You don't realize that you've traveled back to the same spiritual lesson that you needed to learn before. So the psychic training program was very big on using your dreams, remembering your dreams, understanding what they're meaning, and applying it to yourself. And then you have the dark night of the soul at some point. And when you have the dark night of the soul, you get the implosion of your external reality and the explosion of your dream landscape. Now, the dream landscape actually gets bigger in size. This is what they taught him. We talked about this for many, many hours. The dream landscape gets bigger in size, and there's new objects that weren't there before, and they represent new potentials in your soul that you didn't have before. Now you can walk through it in all different ways, and again, the arrow of time is pointing in the direction you're facing. Now, this actually did happen to me, and it blew me away, because I've been writing my dreams down for 28 years as of September 21st. So, yeah, happy anniversary. It's coming up really soon. 28 years I've been doing this stuff. So when I started to really get spiritual growth under my belt, I used to always have to go to high school. And now the high school got much, much, much bigger. And so my locker's over here, but now I got to walk way the heck down this hallway, and there's all these other cool things going on. So I had personal experience that told me that this was true. Another thing that they really insisted that you do is called inverse calisthenics. Okay? Now what does that mean? Inverse calisthenics means that you have to do sit-ups hanging upside down. Now again, please, if you have any medical issues, you gotta be very gentle. Don't take a sudden risk and just flip upside down, because it can really make blood flow to your head. But there are these inverters that you have that are pretty safe if you do it carefully. And then you dangle upside down and you do sit-ups. And I've been doing this. I have an inverter at home. I'm not doing it here, but when I was home, and you want to go up nice and slow, just a nice slow burn, and you just go up there. Now, what they said was that your pineal gland starts to have a much greater amount of blood flowing through it because of the calisthenics, and the more blood goes through your pineal gland, the more psychic you are. Now, here's the one other thing that he said that, and I'm just giving it all to you. I'm not selling this. It's all free. But here it is. Okay, vegans are going to hate me. But they always gave these guys the best steaks. Because apparently, if you have really nicely grown organic meat, and especially if it's only been 5 days or less since it was quote-unquote harvested, at that point, when you're eating that, apparently your psychic ability increases very dramatically. The very likely reason for that is the activator X that's in those things, which Dr. Weston Price, again, if you've heard me talk about that, a dentist who went to all these blue zones where people had never gotten Western food and they were eating traditional food, and they didn't have there was less than one cavity per 1,000 teeth. Everybody had perfect teeth, no heart disease, no diabetes, no cancer. Everybody's healthy, everybody's psychic. So if you don't want to eat meat, you can get the Activator X by using things like butter oil or ghee, especially if the cows are feeding on organic grass that grows at a fast speed. So you can get it with organic butter oil, and you can also get it by eating eggs that have dark orange yolks. So in Los Angeles, there's this Happy Egg company, and that's one of the brands that you can get, and they have this blue egg carton. It's the only blue one there is, and it says rich dark orange yolks. And sure enough, you crack them open, and they're really dark orange. Well, you should probably be eating 2 of those every day for breakfast. That's what I do. I eat 2 eggs a day. I don't always eat the yolk. Sometimes I only eat 1 yolk to cut down on fat, but if I'm really doing a lot of thinking, I'll eat 2 egg yolks in the day because it really, really helps. So again, if you're a vegetarian, no problem. It's just that the steaks are one of several ways to get that. The best steak, in my view, the only steak I eat at all, is bison, because the buffalo there's no hormones, there's no antibiotics, and they have to raise them ethically and they have to kill them ethically, which means that they're not aware that it's going to happen and there's no suffering, it's instantaneous. And 1 bison actually can feed many, 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 many hundreds of people. So you're part of something that's giving back. And actually, another thing that I've said, I'll just throw it out there, this also is going to get my channel taken down. The vegans are going to hate me. I used to be vegan for 7 years. I got very anemic. It didn't work for my body type. That's the only reason why I do this at all. I would prefer to be vegan if I could. My body can't handle it. I get very sick. I get very dark circles under my eyes. They're already dark enough. They get a lot worse. My skin gets very pale. I become very anemic. So I didn't really have a choice, and it was actually Bruce that got me off of being vegan because of what he was telling me about this. That's why I started to eat meat in the first place. Believe it or not, it's true. I couldn't talk about this before because he didn't want me to say any of this stuff and link these pieces together. But anyway, enough of that. You can get it with butter oil. You can get it with dark orange yolks. And you can also get it with fish liver oil. And there's different types of fish that works with. But basically, you need to eat organic food. And there has to be at least something animal related, whether it's like butter or eggs. And so I put it to practice, and it really did seem to work. You know, I started to feel better. And he and I actually did a massive basement renovation at L&L where we built like 3 bedrooms down in the basement and laid down floor and vapor barriers, and we were doing framing and sheetrock and all that stuff, insulation, electrical. We did everything, and we'd worked for months because Carla inherited $85,000 and she wanted to upgrade the house. So I'm down there all day working on this hard labor, and as a vegan, I was like passing out. I was really tired. He said, "I really think you need to start eating meat." "Bruce, what are you saying, man? I'm never going to eat meat. Are you freaking crazy?" Well, in order to do the labor, he said, "Well, just try it. So sure enough, I had a lot more strength, and I figured out, okay, my body doesn't need this, which is kind of a drag, but you do the best that you can. So if you can get by with the butter oil and the eggs, great. That's my recommendation. If you can get away with that, it's awesome. So those are all the basic things that he said. Inverse calisthenics, Activator X, the dream landscape, quiet point meditation, and clustering. Okay, that's really all. He said that's all they had to do, and you just had to do these things. But when you have that dark night of the soul, when you have the implosion of your external landscape and the explosion of your internal landscape, your dream landscape gets bigger. This is one of the most fascinating things they taught in the psychic training program. They said that you are now fulfilling what you were here in this life to achieve. Normally, people don't get through their dream landscape in one lifetime. They keep running through the same cycle. The arrow of time goes in the direction they're facing. They don't learn very much. And so when you actually have that dark night of the soul and your internal landscape explodes, you've downloaded new information that sets you off on a whole new trajectory. And now you're in this whole new reality where you're going beyond what your soul might have thought you were capable of doing in one lifetime. When you bring in energy that is beyond what you would have had in one lifetime, you bring in power. Okay, it's about the power. It's about the spiritual power. Unfortunately, the rules apparently work the same whether you use it for good or evil. Evil people can meditate and use black magic and get it to work. It's about the will. It's about the focused direction of the will. I don't recommend doing anything like that, but you can use it positively as well. So getting back to these scores, okay, he said that typical people, this is what the program taught him, typical people on the P scale are like a P0, meaning they don't have any psychic ability at all. As you become more psychic, you go P1, P2, P3, P4. Natural psychics are people who just have it come naturally. They didn't get this training. They didn't do clustering. They didn't necessarily do the inverse calisthenics or any of this other stuff. It came to them on their own. Their research said that nobody that was a natural ever got above a P4. But in the Psy-Corps, if you train in this science, you can get P5, P6, P7, and anything above like a 6, you could be a wet worker, which again, I don't recommend doing this because it's very, very bad karma. But you know, they could pinch the carotid artery in the neck and cause a stroke. And this apparently is used all the time. You will have psychic shielding based on your karma. So these people cannot do this to you unless you're vulnerable. And that also has to do with the rules of engagement on planet Earth and anywhere in the universe. They can't, no negative force can do anything to you unless you authorized it. You have to be the one that says, I accept this karma by basically inviting it through your own actions. It's really sad, therefore, looking at the world right now that people are not getting the message and they're acting in a very combative way. And there's a lot of anger and there's a lot of hatred and there's a lot of depression. And that's not going to help you. You got to be able to keep your frequencies high because that's one of the whole tricks to this stuff. So, yeah, we go on and on about the psychic training program, but we were talking about the television shows that we watch together. So when you watch Babylon 5, and it was very uncanny, they use the same exact nomenclature on the show, P1 through P10, and they use teeps and teeks as well. And that blew me away. Another example of this was, apparently he said at one point that when you're on the chair and you're looking into the past, that there's a way to do like a mind's eye view of it where you're looking at it without going, and that created a little orb that some people could see, and they had a very exaggerated, funny name for it. It was called an obit, or outer band individuated teletracer. And I said, hey, Bruce, let's just look that up online. And so sure enough, I typed it in, and there's actually an episode of an old black and white television show called The Outer Limits, called Outer Band Individuated Teletracer. That was amazing. There was a show that he said, I guess it was in the 1960s, called The Time Tunnel. And it's total disclosure. So I would also recommend going back and watching that show. There's a tunnel in the show, and it's black and white. Spirals going through a tunnel, and he said that was called a TVG. And as soon as he said TVG to me, I said time vector generator, and I was right. And he was amazed when I did that. So the time vector generator is a whole other thing, but you generate. If you want to, what they would try to do is create a future that they want to have, and they use the TVG to send energy to magnetize that timeline. So he said, it sounds crazy, but once we really get into time travel, anything is possible. So to watch Babylon 5 and to hear them saying teeps and teeks, and to hear them, actually some of the beings in the show have a P11 psychic rating, which he said that's impossible. 10 is the highest anybody's ever gotten. But at a P10, if you're a telekinetic, you can move large objects. So it's pretty fascinating stuff. The other show that we watched was Stargate SG-1. And according to Bruce, Stargate SG-1 is true. That they were, it was sort of a combination of stuff that he was doing with the time travel stuff with Montauk, and stuff that they were doing through what they called the Ancient Stargate Network. Now, what is the Ancient Stargate Network? And I'm looking at the clock. It's 8 o'clock, so it's 10 o'clock on the East Coast, so we're still pretty good here. All right, so What is the ancient Stargate network? The ancient Stargate network, so he claimed, that there's a global grid of energy vortexes on Earth. You've seen me talk about this before. I talked about it in Great Awakening. And in these certain particular areas of the Earth, if you're there at the right time, on the right day, with the right alignments, which has to do with the positions of the planets in the solar system, especially if there's a solar flare happening, and the solar flare is aimed at the Earth while you're in the right alignment. And then there's also these grids that we don't know about that can be tracked, and they move slowly across the surface of the Earth. Everything has to line up. The other big piece is an ancient megalithic stone monument. Because I remember I was talking about charge clusters before. And I was talking about how you send this electrical current off the tip of a needle, it makes this little ball, and the ball will now repel gravity, and the ball has all this energy in it, and it'll deradiate. Well, it also is a time portal. So these little balls will also travel in time. Like I said, anti-gravity is time travel. So the Earth makes these little balls all the time. And they preferentially come up through these particular areas of the Earth that are called the grid nodes, or the global grid. And maybe if I have time, I'll get into that. I'm probably not going to, based on how this is going, and I don't want it to last 5 hours. And I know it's a lot of information. There is a little thing on the side. If you're watching this after I've done it, you click on that little gear shift on YouTube, and playback speed, you can set it to 0.75 and slow my crazy ass down. And then maybe you'll understand this more because you'll have more time to process. I do get into an advanced accelerated brainwave state when I'm talking like this, so I talk very fast. But I'm trying to get the information out for you, and it'll be there, and you can go back and watch it again. So anyway, the Earth, the core of the Earth is actually plasma. It's not an iron ball. Plasma creates magnetic fields. That's also what Kenneth Shoulders discovered with the charge cluster technology. Magnetism can exist on one of these little electrical balls with nothing else to generate the magnetic field. So there is extra magnetism in these grid nodes on Earth, and another insider, the guy who I call Jacob, told me that the way that they used to find these portals, these natural vortexes, is they'd have a little metallic tuning fork with magnets on it. And the tuning fork is joined at the bottom, so it's like a Y. And the magnets, but it's very sensitive. The metal is very thin. The magnets can either come together or farther apart depending on how much magnetic attraction there is. And so when you go into a vortex, they go like this. They start coming together because there's more magnetic energy. So when you have a geomagnetic anomaly, when you have extra magnetism in a particular area of the Earth, you get the possibility that these little guys from inside the Earth's center, these little balls that are, again, like the Terletsky quadrigae, where gravity turns into electromagnetism and it shields time, and so you get all this funny stuff. Really amazing book, by the way, by Jenny Randles called Time Storms, where she describes people encountering these orbs and having time shifts, where like you're like somebody's smoking a cigarette and their hand is moving slow and the smoke is moving too slow, and then other people's voices sound like, that kind of stuff. These things happen naturally, and people sometimes get portaled through time, in quite natural ways. Apparently you can detect that with these little magnetic tuning forks. The magnets come together more, and there we go, there's one. So the stone monuments, actually, because of the nature of matter, the nature of reality, the pyramid functions like a funnel. And I've talked about this extensively. Gravitation has a spin to it. That's the big secret. The spin is where the dimensions are hidden. The spin is where time is powered from. And the spin is what you have to use for consciousness. Spin is the field of consciousness, actually. Gravitational spin is the secret to consciousness, biological life. That's all the Russian science that I've been talking about since the late 1990s, when I started to learn about this, through academic research. Anyway, when these bubbles come up from inside the Earth, you can capture them inside a pyramid or a stone circle like Stonehenge. And that's why, in the 1970s, at Stonehenge, there was a group of hippies tenting and camping inside Stonehenge. And the farmer didn't like that, and so he called the cops. And the farmer and the police were walking towards Stonehenge. They see lightning hit the stones. It starts glowing blue inside. The kids start screaming. It goes to blinding white light in a bubble, a half bubble that covered the whole area of Stonehenge. And then it went, and then there was nobody left inside Stonehenge, and there was only smoldering tent pegs, smoke coming off of them where their tents were, and everybody was gone. That's an example of Stonehenge getting activated for its intended purpose. It's built on the grid. A bubble comes up from inside the earth. It's a time bubble, and you can travel through time with it if you can capture it, so the stones capture the bubbles, suck them in, and if you have the right alignment, you could actually get the portals to work. Now, usually, people on Earth were not using these to travel anywhere. What would happen is that there were ceremonial dates that they were told to come to those locations, and they would all pray because their consciousness would make it work better and attract these bubbles. The ETs then portal in. And you meet with them, and they talk to you, and they teach you things, and they tell you when to come back, and then they leave. Because for them, this is just another way to do time travel. And when I was talking about, all of these different military bases where they have time portals that they're actually using right now in classified programs, they're all located on the grid. So when you look at the grid nodes, where these nodes are on the Earth's geomagnetic grid, there's almost always going to be a military base there, because you can't just time travel anywhere. You got to have the right kind of stuff. If you have the right technology, though, you don't need to wait for an alignment. You can pretty much do it whenever you want. But you can't just travel through a portal anywhere you want. You have to be in the right area. And that's one of the things apparently we're going to learn, where there's these plasma filaments that go through the universe. And that's the first time I said Plasma filaments go through the universe, and you can portal into them and travel much faster than the speed of light, because light is not actually a barrier that we can't get beyond. When you go into these wormholes, traversable wormholes, this stuff does work. And again, you can travel through space and time. And with the ship, when it has enough of the big power system, you create your own portal anywhere you want, create where you want to go, fly through space and time to get there. Okay. So this is what they called the ancient Stargate network. Again, going back to the slide here. And the ancient Stargate network is something that they discovered. Each planet in our galaxy and beyond has its own native Stargate. And there was a group of beings that they call the Elders. And the Elders would travel through these portals. So the one that we had on Earth was in Antarctica, or no, it started out in Egypt. And I guess they dug it up in, I think it's 1923. But the show, Stargate SG-1, tells you exactly what happened. The movie and then the show. The show is more important than the movie, by the way. The show has tons and tons of stuff. Bruce and I watched all of them, all the way through. And everything that they're talking about is related to something that's true. So the Goa'uld are the reptilian Dracos. So when you see Stargate SG-1, at the beginning, these beings have these masks on where they look like cobra heads. And then the cobra head pops open and there's a human being inside. That's the symbolic thing to say that it's a reptilian being. And then, of course, they also have these snakes that get into their neck and wrap around the spinal cord. That part's not true, but it, again, is the reptilian analogy. So all that stuff about the Goa'uld is based on the reptilians. And then they had, in the later seasons, the replicators, which is an AI, predatory artificial intelligence with nanorobots. That's all true, apparently. He was very excited about an episode called The Nox. Said that the Nox represented a certain type of real extraterrestrials. He was also really excited about another, there was one that was Celtic, and it was, now I'm saying because I have to think. I hadn't prepared this stuff. Yeah, there was a group that was the Aesir. That's what he called them, A-E-S-I-R, Aesir. And in the show, they're called Asgard. Apparently, those are real beings. See, I'm doing it again. Now I start saying it keeps happening. Apparently, those are real beings, and they're here in our local realities, because I'm getting tired. My legs are very, very sore and tired right now, actually. So, anyway, he talked about this ancient Stargate network, and what he said was that It is a very real thing that we have a ring that was dug up in Egypt, that there's a dialing device, just like in the show, and you dial in coordinates of where you want to travel, and it will take you there. But the funny part is, it wouldn't allow you to bring any metallic objects, and nothing inorganic could make it through the portal. When you do this portal ride, it's a very dizzying wormhole ride where you see the wormhole, you're in this tunnel of light, you're screaming and waving your arms, and you're going through, and it's twisting and turning, as depicted in the movie Stargate, as depicted in other movies. And when you get to the other side, you're now on the planet that you dialed in. The code is based on a number system, because numbers are universal. So he actually did tell me what our local Stargate address is, believe it or not. There's another thing I wanted to share with you that's fairly new, unless you've really, really studied my stuff. I held this back for many, many years because I wanted to see if anybody had the real information. This is our Stargate address, and it's been so long, I'm not entirely sure the 84 and the 24 are right, but I'm pretty sure that this is it because it's been so long. But anyway, these represent sectors of space. So 7 is something big in the universe. We're in the 7th piece of something that's got 10 sections. And again, you look at the dodecahedron or the icosahedron, the sacred geometry I talk about, it evenly divides up into 10 sections. That apparently is what this is. So we're in section 7, section 5, section 3, then section 84, which is going to be 1 out of 100, section 70. Now, the 606 is actually Earth's local address. So if you only want to make a short trip, all you have to do is dial in the 3-digit number. Mars is 605, and the Aesir, or what they called Asgard on the show, that is the gate address of number 1. So number 1 is very old because they're around a pulsar, and apparently it makes their planet last a really long time without any changes like we would have with solar flash and that kind of stuff going on. So anyway, he also said that people were channeling the Asgard, and then they got the name wrong and they called it Ashtar because their mind didn't quite hear the word right. And that's where the Ashtar command stuff from the 1950s apparently came from. Some of it. A lot of it was probably fake. Some of it was probably genuine telepathic contact. Yeah, I know, we're going in a lot of different directions, but hang with me. This is really, really important. So the gates are not a universal thing that's just fixed. They are made by these beings that are very ancient, but time travel, so they're basically like always around, and they call these beings the Elders. The Elders uphold the Stargates. Every planet has a native Stargate. Ours was in Egypt. That's what the Stargate SG-1 show is disclosing. The truth, according to Bruce, is that they actually buried it in Antarctica because they were worried about something dangerous getting through that could hurt life on Earth, and then they developed their own method. The other problem is, if you travel through an ancient Stargate, you're going to get screwed up. In fact, let's go to that slide right now. Most people who traveled through these gates were permanently damaged. It is not, it's such a psychologically overwhelming thing to have this happen to you that people can't handle it, they freak out, and they basically come out schizophrenic and they're babbling and crazy. So it's because we don't have the integration between spirit and body to handle that trip. It snaps the link between the mind and the body. And so that gets into another really, really interesting thing that they discovered in the course of this time research. And that is what they call the ZTR. And again, if you studied my stuff a long time ago, you might have heard this. So don't hate me for repeating anything, but this is very important I include this. The ZTR is the linkage between your soul and your body. And that linkage normally occurs at the time that you were born. Your soul and your body are one. So when they tell you to meditate and go back to your quiet point, and they tell you to cluster, and as you cluster down, you get down to where your parents were and the trauma that your parents gave you because you saw them as God. When you resolve that trauma, when you can forgive your parents, you can go back to, psychologically and spiritually, you can dial it back to the moment you were conceived, where you have your zero time reference. This is where your soul and your body are one. You have to go back there to be able to do any of this advanced psychic stuff that they teach you in the training programs, okay? You have to be able to go back to your ZTR, which means you have to deal with your childhood trauma. If you don't, you're not going to make it. The ZTR is a very, very fascinating thing because when they started to send people through the tunnels that the Montauk chair was making, if they sent people into the future from where they were in 1981, let's say, you very rapidly, in less than a day, age to the age that you would be at that time in history. And they didn't know why this was, but it was very deadly because you could die if you go significantly beyond your natural age. So like if you send somebody through who's 70 and you send him 30 years in the future, now he's going to be 100. If he's not naturally going to live to 100, it's very dangerous. So they had various extraterrestrial societies they were supposedly working with because, again, in the inside world, there's ETs everywhere. This is part of what we're going to get when we get full disclosure. There's a lot of different ETs that have been working with us for a long, long time. And when you go into the future, your body ages to prevent time paradoxes. You won't be able to live if you don't have a special treatment. So what is the treatment? Remember I said TVG, time vector generator? Well, it turns out that you can alter your ZTR with these certain extraterrestrial technologies. You can snap it deliberately to set your ZTR at the age so that you're the same age where you end up going as the age that you are now. In other words, your ZTR, so if you're 40 years old, let's say, and you know that you're going to go to the year 2025, you're 40 years old, then you go back 40 years, which I guess would be 1985. So 1985 is when you would set the ZTR. So now you were born in 1985, you shifted it. This apparently can be done with this technology. You use the TVG, you pump in energy to shift it to 1985. So now when you travel to 2025, you're safe. Okay, that's how it actually works. And you also have these belt packs that they give people to keep you in your zero-time reference. It keeps stimulating you to hold it in the place that it needs to be. So you have to have that with you, I guess, in order for this to work. That's one of the things. And it's all programmed now. So, but they use time travel very infrequently. Since this started in the early 1980s, they only are using maybe about 5,000 people a decade in these time travel programs. But it's really cool because one of these time travel programs is the plan that they transmitted back into the past in the 1950s, seeing the scope of the problem, seeing how to get through it, and building that binder that's 5 inches thick. That's how it was done. So let's see. If you go into the past, you can also shift your time, your ZTR, zero time reference, you can shift it backwards. So you can go into the past and make it and stay alive. What Bruce didn't really have that the new briefings have given me is the knowledge of these spheres, which in Stargate SG-1, they had a little machine they'd send out, and the machine would take a look, and it was this little thing on wheels. Well, they had to make it look conventional for the show, but in reality, it's a sphere. It's a chrome sphere about 14 inches wide, and it can look at television signals, audio signals. It has weapons capability. It can defend itself, and they would send that first through the tunnel, take a look around. It has a live video feed because, again, time doesn't exist, and they use this quantum correlation. Pete Peterson taught me a lot about how this works, and I'll give you some of the technical detail. Again, to show you how complex this stuff gets. According to Pete Peterson, the basic system of quantum entanglement requires a particular electrical component called a diode. A diode is, if you've studied electronics, you know that a diode only allows current to pass through in one direction. So it stops it from backflowing. What you would do in this particular technology is you would overload the diode. You give it too much energy so that it starts to have a bidirectional flow. It doesn't just go in one direction anymore. It goes both directions. It's about to melt down, and so that's the point they call avalanche. When you avalanche the diode, it's going to melt down. So by overloading the diode at an exact frequency you can then overload another diode at the exact same frequency at a different place in space and in time, okay? And now there's quantum entanglement, quantum correlation between this diode over here and this diode over here, even if this one's in the future and this one's in the past. So according to Pete Peterson, I'm probably going to get in a lot of trouble for saying this, man. Apparently these diodes are already in a lot of our technology, all our phones, all our computers. They already have this non-local quantum system that they built that Pete was involved in inventing. But the quantum correlation, they perfected it to the point where they can send video and audio, because it's just like broadband. Once you've created once you have the two matching frequencies, you get a quantum entanglement between the two diodes, and they link between space and time. And then at that point, you can pump all kinds of signals through, and then it rides the fluctuations, and the fluctuations you create over here come in over here, so you get wireless transmission across time. Wi-Fi through time. That's what the Orion Cube is using. That's what they were doing without realizing what they were really doing in the Philadelphia experiment, which is true. Jerry Vassilatos has an amazing thing that he wrote about that in his book. It's in my first book, Source Field Investigations. So the quantum entanglement is incredibly, incredibly exciting, because I didn't realize until the new briefings that it sends video through time, but of course it makes sense. If you can send data at all, you can send video data, because you can reduce it to zeros and ones. So what they would do is they would send these spheres through, do some reconnaissance, look at where they're going to go, and then they also had, the guys would have their own little QCDs, which is like a little BlackBerry kind of thing. It apparently does have a little keyboard on it that's a physical keyboard that you push with your fingers. It's not like an iPhone. And you can film, and you can do audio, and you can communicate with your ground team, and you'll see them, and you can have a voice chat, even though you're in the past and they're in the future. So that little piece added so much and explained what was really going on with Bruce. And of course, he didn't have the need to know. He didn't get all this stuff. But it all connects very nicely. So they can send you into the past, and you can talk to them, and they can see where you are. You don't bring any technology with you. That's a very important point. When you do time travel, you don't bring anything with you. And these guys would go into it. They can make a time bubble where you can spend a long time learning certain information, and then you come out and it's like you never left. So you might spend 6 months or a year learning ancient Latin. Once they've sent these spheres in, they look at Rome, and they look at ancient Rome, and they say, okay, this is how people are talking. We've analyzed the language. This is a dialect. This is their accent. These are the colloquialisms. These are the funny words they use. This is a curse word, And so you learn it from the direct observation of the spheres. Which, by the way, the spheres were depicted in the movie Oblivion with Tom Cruise very prominently. They also show up in They Live. Once the people put those the sunglasses on in the movie They Live, if you haven't seen it, I definitely recommend it. That's when they could see the little sphere going around, which you can't see with the naked eye. All that stuff is true, except again, the spheres are actually featureless on the outside to make it less obvious what they are if they ever crash, which apparently sometimes they do. Some people see orbs, and a lot of times these things will glow. So people see glowing orbs hovering over. That might be one of these surveillance devices, actually. And again, in this world, time doesn't really exist, and the extraterrestrials have mastered this eons ago, and we get the technology. So apparently the main thing that they started to do with this time travel programs, this is one of the most fascinating things I just learned about. If someone in the past, which we think is the past, right? We think it's old stuff. If someone in the past finds an extraterrestrial device that is a time travel device, where you hold on to these two things, or a lot of times it's a handheld thing, you hold on to it, and you think about where you want to go, and it creates a portal, and you walk through, and it takes you there. A lot of different beings have come and gone on Earth, and because in their world time travel is very ordinary, maybe they dropped one or something, and they left it behind. These guys were always going around scanning, trying to figure out if anybody could find these. Now, why does that matter? Let's say this guy in ancient Rome finds one of these devices. Let's say that he starts using it and he figures out what to do. That guy can change our reality. That guy can screw our entire timeline, because he could start going around, just like in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, or just like we saw in Doctor Who with the TARDIS. You can go around, you can alter things, you can change events, and then time gets screwed up. And it's actually very, very dangerous, because the past isn't really the past. You grab this machine, and now you're traveling through time. And you can alter our reality. And so these guys in the secret programs, and this has been ongoing ever since Montauk, they have to go out there and find where people are finding these devices, because what they'll notice is the Mandela effect. You know, something changes, something goes wrong, there's something's weird, and they can detect this. Actually, there's ways to detect changes in the flow of time having to do with isotopes, and the way that isotopes are functioning, I guess, and the way they vibrate, the radioactive nature of the isotopes. They can detect fluctuations in the physics of our reality and the energy, and then they can actually detect where in time that might have happened. They send the little spheres through. So this is the other thing I didn't know about time travel that's very exciting. When they send these teams through, what they're doing is they train them in a language, so that they give them the clothes. They create the portal, which again was probably based off of the Montauk research, very likely. They send you back in time, and once you get there, you have to figure out where in time you are. And so your little QCD device, your little pager thing, has all this cool technology in it, where you detect things like the radioactive emissions from the sun, the decay rate of radioactive isotopes that naturally exist in the atmosphere, the electromagnetic field, the gravitational strength, all these very particular things which allow them fairly, and they also will look at the stars and look at the positions of the stars, and they could be there for a couple of years. They create something called a hub. They go into the hub, that's where they portal in, and they will have their native, they hardly bring any technology at all. But they stay in touch with the QCD, and a lot of times they'll disguise a QCD in something that's period appropriate for the time. They cannot screw around at all. All they'll usually do is go find the guy. They got to target the guy who found the device, or the woman, and they got to steal it before they figure out how to use it. But when they start using it, you can detect that in the present, because again, quantum correlation means all time fluctuations can ultimately be detected in some way. So when people power it on, things change, and they can see that, uh-oh, we got to grab that thing before they go back and do it. Now, theoretically, you say, well, wait a minute, that was the past. They already did it. No. The past isn't fixed. The past changes, and we don't know because we're not seeing it anymore, right? The only thing that absolutely exists is the present, and it's an everlasting present. So events that we think happened in history might now have changed. And that was one of the things that really tripped them out, is that historical events do not necessarily still happen. In other words, you go into the past, and it might be that different things are now happening, or that historical events for a particular time have now altered, or that the date is different because people didn't write down the right date. So you got to make an approximate jump to the approximate location. You create your hub, which is just it's like a cave or something underground, a hidden spot where you go to meet and use the QCD and talk to your people. You figure out where you are in time, you calibrate everything, the sun, the emissions of radioactivity, the star positions, etc. Then you calibrate exactly where you are in time, and then they can send you exactly where you need to go. So another portal opens up, you walk through it, and now you know you're in the right time. You create your hub, and you might need to spend a year or two speaking the language, talking to the natives. Nobody knows where your hub is. You don't go there very much. You occasionally go back to give a progress report, video chat, just like Skype or Zoom to the future, because again, there's no real time. It's all simultaneous. Nothing really exists except for consciousness, and that's what the ETs know. So then they'll tell you where to go and how to do the mission, and how to, because they got the spheres deployed so they can figure out what people are doing, and you got to go in there and you got to steal it. In some cases, they would kill the people if they had to. The spheres do have a self-destruct mode, so they can just put it near somebody and blow it up. And apparently they also have like some kind of particle beam weapon. I'm not really clear about what that is. The briefings didn't get into a whole lot of detail on that. But, whew, this is really crazy stuff. I know, I'm sorry if it sounds like I'm just totally insane, but you know, this is what you hear, and I'm just telling you guys what I learned. So the Time Tunnel show talks about some of this early research. It does appear that they were kind of playing around with it, maybe in the 60s and 70s, but they really had no idea what they were doing from Philadelphia experiment stuff. They didn't really nail this down until Montauk in the early 80s, and then all the programs that branched off of that. There was a conference that was held in the Black Ops community every year called the Sigma Conference, and that's where they were doing the think tank on the time travel stuff and figuring out how it works. Bruce told me about that. I don't know if he ever went to the Sigma conferences or not, but I know that he knew people who did. Anyway, the other thing that they might do is they might capture somebody from the past and bring them into the present, shift their ZTR so they can live here. And usually those people will stay underground, but they've found that it's not really worth it to grab anybody earlier than the 1800s because they don't have the education and they don't necessarily have the intelligence. We've gotten a lot smarter as time goes on. I've talked about that before. So getting into one of the things that I really was going to cover, one of the main topics that I was going to cover is in certain military bases, and this is stuff that multiple sources from the Alliance have now asked us to disclose. In certain military bases, they have QCDs under very heavy guard, lock and key, need to know, multiple security checkpoints. It's not easy to get in there. You have to be able to have a reason. You have to sign off. You have to have a protocol. There's a whole elaborate system of how this works. But at certain times, you're allowed to go in there and fire up the QCD and talk to people in the future. And the people in the future are us. And those people in the future figured out how to defeat the cabal and what was going to be necessary. How are we going to do this? What are the steps? And they transmitted that information back into the 1950s. Apparently, one of the missions that they did was to create a hub and send some people from the future back into these military bases in the 1950s, and with Eisenhower and these kind of people, gave them a QCD and said, keep this under lock and key, and we're going to give you these instructions. And then they transmitted the plan, the 5-inch binder, the book. They transmitted it through the QCD, which again, you overload a diode, you create the avalanche, you get quantum entanglement, and you jiggle it on this side in the past, in the 1950s, you jiggle it over here in 2029, and you can talk, video chat, and you can transmit documents, and all that kind of stuff, and that's apparently how the plan was made. And so this is what the magic letter 17 was talking about when they were saying Project Looking Glass going forward in order to look back. Remember, they put a question mark after Looking Glass, so it's not really Looking Glass, it's actually these QCD devices, and that's what they're using. So this is really amazing, folks, because the plan is foolproof. Have you noticed that 17 keeps saying nothing can stop what is coming? Nothing. They say it over and over again, and we're all like, oh no, I hope, you know, nothing bad happens, and I hope we're not all going to die, and it's the end of the world. No, look. I've been getting this stuff about what we're going through right now. I've been getting these prophecies since 1996, and that's what my new book describes. I finished the book in January, and I'm talking about how there's this coming breakdown of society that's right around the corner, and sure enough, a couple months later, there it was. So the book was written before the prophecy came true, but the prophecies in the book go beyond where we are right now. And they include the fact that the cabal is defeated and that we learn a lot of really disgusting stuff. There is a monster under the bed. You can look at it if you want to, but it's really going to gross you out and you're probably going to want to puke. But if you throw up, you'll feel better. So our friends in the future are going to be helping us as we go through this. Now, the partial disclosure that they've apparently fed to the president is that all extraterrestrials and all craft that we see are actually craft operating in the future, and because of this time-bending effect, which I'm sure they're going to teach us a lot more about as time goes on, not as fast as I'm doing right now, So I'm beating them to the punch, and they're probably very pissed off at me, but that's okay because they haven't immigrated that to YouTube yet as a ban and a censorship. Not yet, not yet. It'll maybe in time, or whatever time really is. That's a whole other discussion. Anyway, the briefings that they're apparently going to try to roll out as the partial disclosure thing, and you're seeing me, I'm going to even go in close on this. The briefings that they want to give you, the briefings that they're going to try to sell to you for the partial disclosure timeline is, and what POTUS is referring to when he talks about this, that what we see is actually stuff in the future and it's a time bleed through. And he says, I can't tell you what I know, but it's very interesting. Right? That was in the interview with POTUS. So, yep, that's as much as they've told him. And that way they can say that everything is humans from the future. And there's no extraterrestrials. And there's nothing off planet. And there's nothing really underground. And we get this partial disclosure. And they want to feed us little tidbits of information over the course of 50 years. Now, I want to be very, very clear on this, folks. There are plenty of people in the Department of Defense who are good guys, who are patriots, and they will not allow partial disclosure to happen. That's where, if I'm in the audience, I get the applause break, and everybody starts standing up and cheering, because it's true. They are not going to allow this to happen, because all they have to do is disclose, folks. All they have to do is tell us. And they have tons of videos, they have tons of documents, they have tons of artifacts, they have tons of technology. Once we become a time travel society, we instantaneously become way more advanced because right away we can zip ahead to the furthest point that we achieved and bring it back to where we are. That's another reason why you don't want to let people in the past get a hold of this stuff. What if they go far enough ahead that they get a really good weapon and they go back into their time frame and they start killing people and changing reality because they have a weapon that nobody can defend against? If you're in ancient Rome and you have some kind of particle beam weapon, forget it. History changes. So they monitor for these fluctuations in time and they got to go back and fix it. Sometimes they'll make a mistake. They drop something. They leave something behind, one of the QCDs. Then they have to go back and edit it. But actually, a lot of the times when you make a time paradox, the ETs taught these people in the Sigma program, they talk about it every year at Sigma. When you create that paradox, you will you let it ride. The small ones, the nature fixes itself. Something happens. So when I was talking to Bruce about this, when he was working at Montauk, they were already doing this research at that time. There was a guy that was crazy enough to go back and kill his father. Wait a minute, if your father's dead, then how could you be alive? Well, if layered time, I'm on this layer, and on this layer my father was alive, and now I killed him here. Am I just going to go back to my layer? Well, what happened was, and I've said this many times, the guy traveled back. He traveled back to where he left. He killed his father. Yeah, I did it, and they all watched it. They watched it on the screen because the QCDs are monitoring everything. Yeah, you killed him. And then the next day or 2 days later, he steps out into traffic accidentally and he gets hit by a car and he dies. And they found that this happened over and over again. Anytime you try to create a time paradox, like you see in the movie Back to the Future and many other examples, it actually, what have I got here? Somebody's texting me. Oh, okay. Oh, cool. All right. That's something else related to our other technological stuff I can't talk about. And believe me, I would, and I will as soon as I can. But I haven't used this time stuff, so please don't get into elaborate speculation. We're just trying to get some machines built, and none of it has to do with time travel. This is not what we're building. I hope that we will be able to do that, but then we're going to have to use it well. And then we're going to have to figure out how to transport this plan back in time so that the cabal is appropriately defeated, I guess. It's a lot to take in. You see how complex this is? I mean, I'm not making this up. This is the result of many, many years of study, intense interviews with a lot of different insiders and piecing all this stuff together. And that's why I wanted to make this all at once and get it all out there. So if I lose my channel, I know that I've done the best I could do to get this all out in one big piece and frickin' drive a stake into the heart of that vampire. Because we're not going to take partial disclosure, folks, and the DOD isn't going to allow it either. So we're we're a lot closer to major planetary healing than we think, which is great.